and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Coming up on our program, a look at a historic law that changes how the terminally ill can choose to die. Plus, a choir devoted to easing the journey for those in their final days of life. And we'll talk about what's next after this week's primary election. But first, a look at the sexual assault case involving a former Stanford University student that has sparked global outrage.
Listen to survivors! Listen to survivors! Listen to survivors!
Activists gathered today in San Francisco to deliver a petition with more than 1 million signatures calling for the removal of the judge in the case. Last week, Judge Persky sentenced 20-year-old Brock Turner to 6 months in jail. Turner was convicted of sexually assaulting an unconscious 23-year-old woman on Stanford's campus. Many view the sentence as too lenient. It's fueling debates about campus sexual assaults, along with how race and privilege play out in the criminal justice system. Joining me now are Stanford University law professor Michele Dauber, who's spearheading the recall effort against Judge Persky, and Katy Murphy, higher education reporter for the Bay Area News Group. Welcome to you both. Katy, I want to ask you, first of all, the last 2 days we've seen so many actions surrounding this case. In addition to the recall petition, at least a dozen state lawmakers are now demanding an investigation of the judge for misconduct. They're also demanding a review of the sentence in this case. Vice President Joe Biden has issued an open letter in support of the victim. Why do you think this case in particular, compared to other campus sexual assault cases, is receiving this level of anger and attention?
I think, for one thing, what's different about this case was the victim wrote this incredibly moving, compelling statement that went completely viral on BuzzFeed. It was posted, I believe, on Friday. It was long. It was just extraordinary, and it took this this person who, is still nameless and faceless, but it infused her with. She became a real human, a real person. And she described how devastating the attack was, even though she didn't remember it. And she also responded to all of these myths about rape and sexual assaults, especially those involving alcohol. So I think that people around the world were reading that, were so moved by it. And then in contrast to that, we're reading the statements by the defendant and Brock Turner, who was a former swimmer at Stanford, and his father and other supporters who were trying to get the lenient sentence. And the letter from the dad said that this was only, this was 20 minutes of action in his 20+ years of life. And that 20 minutes of action line just took on a life of its own, especially in the context of her letter. And just, we use the word firestorm a lot, but this actually, I think,
did ignite
yes.
the firestorm. Since you're talking about the statements, we do have a couple of excerpts from the statements. So let's, first of all, take a look at the letter that Brock Turner submitted to the court prior to his sentencing. He said, "I've been shattered by the party culture and risk-taking behavior that I briefly experienced in my 4 months at school." The victim's letter, which you just mentioned, Katy, she addressed that issue in her own statement, which she read out loud in court. And she said, "Regretting drinking is not the same as regretting sexual assault. We were both drunk. The difference is I did not take off your pants and underwear, touch you inappropriately, and run away." Professor Dauber, how are these statements now shaping the debate online and in the media, really around the world? And lots of people are talking about this.
Yes, well, I think that the important thing for people to understand about her statement is that she wrote it to persuade one person, not the millions of people who are now reading it. She wrote it to persuade Judge Aaron Persky that Mr. Turner should receive a sentence consistent with the law. And unfortunately, Judge Persky appears to be the one person perhaps on earth who was not persuaded by her statement, and instead he paid a great deal of attention to the statements of Mr. Turner, which did not take responsibility for sexual assault or express remorse for sexual assault. It was a kind of a non-apology apology. I'm sorry this happened, without really saying what the this is, except that he got drunk.
Well, the DA asked for 6 years in this case,
Yes.
in prison, and he was given 6 months, and he may get out in as little as 3 months with good behavior. Why do you want the judge recalled? Do you think that there's actual misconduct in this case?
No, I don't. I'm not accusing, nor is anyone connected with the committee to recall Aaron Persky suggesting in any way at this time that he has committed any ethical violation or any malfeasance. What we are saying is that he doesn't understand sexual violence and violence against women, and we want to put that and this decision before the voters so that they can replace him, hopefully, with someone who does understand those issues, because these issues are too important and too central to the lives of women, and particularly women students, to allow someone who would make a decision like this to continue in that position.
Some in the legal community are defending the judge, though. We reached out to the DA and the public defender in Santa Clara County. They both declined to come on the show, but they have publicly supported the judge, saying that he displayed proper discretion in this case, given Brock Turner's youth and his lack of a criminal record. Your reaction to that?
I have two reactions to that. First of all, the California statute says that the sentence in this case is supposed to be an absolute minimum of 2 years, and it's presumptively ineligible for probation. And what presumptively ineligible for probation means is that the judge has to really make an exception and bend over backwards, really, to make an exception in order to deviate from that minimum sentence. And in this case, the way he did that was he found that he was intoxicated and he was a very high-achieving young man prior to his crime. And that describes essentially every single sexual assault at Stanford University. All of these young men are intoxicated and all of these young men are high-achieving. So we can't have a situation where we are deciding that if you commit your crime on a college campus, then you get a get-out-of-jail-free card. That's unacceptable.
And I should point out that DA Rosen is against the sentence that was given out, even though he doesn't feel the judge should be recalled. And I want to ask you something else as well. Since we're talking about the judge, he's the same judge who handled a case at De Anza College in Cupertino about 5 years ago. And that was a civil case involving allegations of gang rape. The men were not found guilty by a jury. You spoke with one of the female soccer players who helped the victim in that case. What is her reaction to all this? And what's the reaction from people you've talked to about this case? Do they feel that the system is broken beyond repair, or there's hope here?
Well, the woman I spoke to, Lauren Chief Elk, was one of the soccer players who went in and rescued a 17-year-old from this party where the site of the gang rape incident or allegations, and she felt that she wasn't surprised at all by the sentence. And
she was not?
No.
Why?
She said she was horrified by it, but not surprised. And she felt like this shows that the system was doing what it was designed to do, which is protect people of privilege. And she didn't think it was there to protect women who were victims of sexual violence.
Okay. Well, much more to come on this, I'm sure. And thank you both for coming on and talking about a really complicated issue. Professor Michele Dauber and Bay Area News Group reporter Katy Murphy. Thank you both.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
This week, California delivered Hillary Clinton a victory that seriously dented Bernie Sanders' efforts to prove he had populist appeal in the Golden State. But Sanders hasn't formally endorsed Clinton, as the Democratic Party now focuses on defeating Donald Trump. Tuesday's primary election also yielded a series of heated November runoffs. The contest between Kamala Harris and Loretta Sanchez to replace retiring Senator Barbara Boxer, along with races for South Bay congressional and state Senate seats. Here to discuss the election results is Scott Shafer, our senior editor of politics and government. Hi, Scott.
Hello.
All right, we're going to start off here by putting you on the spot. Last week you were on the show with a couple of other panelists talking about how close the race was between Hillary and
Making
Bernie.
a grand prediction.
Grand prediction. Let's take a look at that prediction.
really is. We now have 4 polls showing it's essentially a dead heat within a point or two. And I think what's happened is this. California, of course, is a very diverse state. And for many, many months, the conventional wisdom has been that blacks, Latinos, and Asian American voters would be her firewall, that would be the way she would win, as she has in the South, for example. And Bernie Sanders has made tremendous inroads among those voters. And that's
well, it turns out the race wasn't close at all. Explain yourself.
Well, you know, there's an old expression that the only poll that really counts is the one on Election Day. And that's the case. I mean, it is unusual. There were 4 polls, and they all showed identically the same thing, that Clinton was up by 2, that he had made inroads in all these minority groups, but it just didn't turn. What polls are also, there were a guess about who's going to vote. And it turned out that all these young folks who had registered in the last few months, they didn't vote. And so the electorate was older, it was whiter, it was more Democrat, as opposed to a no-party preference, and all that accrued to Hillary Clinton's advantage.
Well, and the Clintons are also very familiar with California, right? Bill Clinton visited California more than any other president. Hillary Clinton won the state back in 2008 against Obama. How much did that Clinton political machinery and familiarity with the state come into play?
I think it makes a big difference. I mean, Bernie Sanders came into California with a big head of steam, but he had no real infrastructure just a year ago. I mean, Bill Clinton was on the ballot twice in 1992, 1996, and as you said, 2008. They've won every single time, and they have deep relationships, not just with the political operatives, but with the black churches and in the Latino community and the Asian American community. And those things really matter, because when you need to get people out to vote, you need people, surrogates on your behalf at the churches and elsewhere, sort of, turning out people to the polls.
Yeah, and in the final few days of the campaign, I think I had read they called 2 million voters. That's astounding.
It was retail politics, which you never see in California. I mean, you see that in New Hampshire and Iowa, but to see Bill Clinton in Antioch and Hayward and Hillary Clinton in Paris, P-E-R-R-I-S, California, it was extraordinary.
So what happens now? What impact does California's primary have on the overall presidential election?
Well, I think it ended up having a big impact, but not in the way that we expected just a few weeks ago. I mean, you may remember that it looked like it was going to be decisive for Donald Trump, that it was the last chance to stop Trump. There was a big anti-Trump movement here, and then the air went completely out of that balloon, and it turned out to be super important to Hillary Clinton. I mean, if Bernie Sanders had won on Tuesday, we'd have a very different context this week. I mean, as it is, we saw Sanders really backing off his criticism of her. He's going to be meeting with her next week. Elizabeth Warren has endorsed her, the president. So I think there's that. And then also, I think Hillary Clinton found her voice in California. That speech she gave down in San Diego on national security, where she really took on Trump, I think that penetrated the public psyche, yeah, more than almost anything she's done in this campaign.
I want to also ask you about the California top 2 primary and how it's affected the outcome in the race to replace retiring Senator Barbara Boxer. We've got 2 Democrats now battling each other, Kamala Harris and Loretta Sanchez.
Never happened before, and it's sort of what all the polls did show. They were right on that one, but Kamala Harris did really well. She got 40% of the vote.
She had the most money as well.
She had the most money. She had the endorsements. She had the endorsement of the Democratic Party. And she's sort of a rising star in the party. But
what do you do now if you're Loretta Sanchez?
It's tough. You know, she won only 5 counties in California out of 58. Kamala won 50 of them. The Republicans won 3. She barely won her own county, Loretta Sanchez, Orange County. So it's really tough. I mean, she will probably play up her credentials on the Homeland Security Committee and the Armed Services Committee. To maybe appeal to more conservative voters. Republicans don't have anywhere to go now because there's no Republican on the ballot, but it's tough. The math is tough.
Let's talk about the House race as well, real quickly, between Ro Khanna and Mike Honda. Very tight. Honda won last time. This is the rematch for them. How do things look for Honda this time around?
It's tough. I mean, last time they faced off in the primary in 2014, Honda was ahead by 20 points. This time, Ro Khanna's ahead by a few hundred votes. Big change from last time. He's got a lot of headwinds, Mike Honda does. He's got this House ethics investigation. President Obama has not endorsed him this time. He's being neutral.
Which is astounding. He's an 8-term incumbent.
Yeah, it is. And so you're seeing some groups that had endorsed Honda the first time are now with Ro Khanna. Honda's having trouble raising money. So I would have to say that Mike Honda is probably the most vulnerable California congressman in California. That said, he'll be replaced by another Democrat, because again, it's two Democrats facing off against each other.
And want to leave on the state Senate race between San Francisco supervisors Jane Kim and Scott Wiener, also getting a lot of attention. A bit of a surprise there. Jane Kim had a strong showing.
She did. It was he was very much expected to kind of run away with it. He had, again, the endorsements, the money. He had the official stamp of approval by the county Democratic Party, which everyone assumed would really help him. And she
had that ad that we're looking at now, Black Belt Kim.
Yeah, the Black Belt ad, which people were talking about.
Yeah.
And maybe most importantly, she got a big endorsement from Bernie Sanders in the closing days of the campaign. That got her a lot of attention and kind of really energized. Even though Bernie Sanders lost San Francisco, it helped her.
She had the Bernie bump. Also, and just want to say that Measure AA, a regional parcel tax to help with flood control projects, passed as well. And boy, that was a lot to cover.
That was. And there's going to be a lot more in November.
Exactly. Thanks so much, Scott.
You bet.
Also on the legislative front, yesterday, California became the 5th state in the nation to allow what's called aid in dying. The End of Life Option Act allows terminally ill adults who have less than 6 months to live to request a prescription for a lethal dose of medication. Joining me now is Dr. Lonnie Shavelson, who founded a practice in response to the new law. Dr. Shavelson, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.
You were an emergency room doctor and a primary care physician for nearly 40 years before retiring from medicine. What made you come out of retirement now to have this practice devoted to patients who want to end their lives?
Sure. You know, this goes back quite far for me. About 22 years ago, I was looking at this issue of physician aid in dying and wrote a book at that point in time called The Chosen Death. Chosen Death was basically an examination of the hidden practice of what was then called assisted suicide, about how patients who were concerned about how they might die were hoarding their medications, about how family members were being involved in their deaths, much to their dismay of helping a patient to die, physicians who were doing this in secret. And so in my work in examining this through what the hidden underground of assisted suicide looked like, it became really apparent to me that this was something that patients really were asking for, sometimes incorrectly, if not most of the time incorrectly. They were just afraid of how they would die and were asking for help in hastening their death.
So then how does this new law then work to clarify that and to make that situation better in your mind?
Right. So the new law says very specifically is that if a patient says that they are suffering at the end of their life to the point where they are finished, they're done, it's often for a variety of reasons, but it's the patient's reason. They can request of their physician an aid in dying medication, which means a dosage of a medication sufficient to cause death. They have to make 2 requests for that with 15 days separating them, because we really want to be sure this isn't sort of like a flash-in-the-pan decision, sudden decision. So there's a 15-day waiting period between the 2 requests.
And they have to be determined that they're mentally competent as well.
Yes, this does not apply to patients with dementia, for example. They have to be competent of understanding the decision and being able to make medical decisions that take care of their care.
So this law was intended to help terminally ill patients avoid prolonged pain and suffering, which is what Governor Jerry Brown said when he signed it into law. But in Oregon, which has had a right to die law for years, state data shows there's only about a quarter of those who died from lethal medication who said they were worried about pain control.
That's right.
What are some of the other major reasons people want to do this?
You know, it's a great example. At the end of life now, we have a phenomenal ability to take care of people as they die. And hospice care, palliative care, all of that has improved so much and is being used so much more that pain control is really not the issue. What really is the issue is the patient's own sensation of what suffering means. For some, suffering is laying in bed, slowly dying for a period of 3 to 4 weeks. For some, suffering is having their family there watching as they suffer. Everybody has their own definition of what suffering means.
Or perhaps burdening their families?
Or burdening their families is one possibility. And patients make decisions autonomously all of the time. Even decisions like stopping chemotherapy at the end of their battle with cancer is a decision that we respect. We may say, but you should have more chemotherapy, but we never just say to the patient, you must have more chemotherapy. And yet at the end of life, we've been willing to say, you must have more life, you have to wait.
But Dr. Shavelson, as you know, there are many who are very morally opposed to what you're doing here. You're being called Dr. Death online. A lot of tweets have been said about what you're doing. And And I guess this goes to the point, what you just said, the various reasons that people do this, they don't always include fear of pain. So critics of the law are concerned that this opens up a whole new can of worms, opens it up to, could lead to the abuse of the elderly or the poor or others who may not understand there are other options.
Sure. So this is not something new in the entire world. For instance, in the United States, we have 4 states that are already participating in aid in dying. And all of those fears that people bring up, that there's a slippery slope, will be literally killing people with other diseases or against their will. 18 years of experience in the state of Oregon, and none of that has happened. This has actually improved the end-of-life care in Oregon. If you look at the significance of how this has played out in the state of Oregon, the effect has been a very tiny, tiny number of people who have actually taken the medication, less than 0.5%, 0.5% of the population who died. Yet, overall end-of-life care in the state has improved phenomenally during that time without any signs of abuse. So I appreciate that fear that people might have, but it hasn't turned out to be reality.
All right. Well, as we said, the law just went into effect this week. We will see how it works out in the future. Dr. Lonnie Shavelson, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And we would like to tell you now about a Bay Area group that's using music to help those who are dying. For more than a decade now, the Threshold Choir has been easing the final journey through song.
You are not alone. I am here now.
I'm 38. My full name is Adrian Luca Brooks Safay Sager. I have terminal brain cancer.
I am here beside you.
I want to do this work of singing at the bedside of people who are dying because I feel very strongly that death is a very real part of life and we can't just ignore it.
May peace be with you.
When I go to the bedside, it is an opportunity to be in a very sacred space with someone because you are there with a person in their most intimate time.
May love be.
They're going through their own questions about why me? Am I going to see tomorrow? They're reflecting in a way that is very pure.
I am Kate Munger. I'm the founder of the Threshold Choir. In 1990, I was asked to fill in a volunteer slot for a friend who was dying of HIV/AIDS. It was very distressing to see him comatose and agitated. So I did what I did at the time when I was nervous or afraid, and I started singing. I watched him calm, settle, get positively serene, and I calmed, settled, and got positively serene, and it felt that I had discovered something, or rediscovered something, an ancient practice that tribal humans do for one another when someone's struggling.
It's helped with relieving some of my pain, some of my physical pain in my head. I just smile a lot.
My grateful heart.
I came close to death. I had a brain tumor that was very large, and it was a pretty scary time. And I came out of that surgery blind and unable to walk, and I had an opportunity to decide, okay, what am I going to do now? You know, if I get better, I'm going to do something important. I always loved to sing, and I heard there were these people that sang to people who were dying, and I thought that was the most incredible thing I'd ever heard. I got a little shiver up my spine, and I went, oh, I've got to go do this.
Sing.
When they hear that first sound, especially when they hear the harmonies, it's a visceral experience. It's full body absorption of vibration.
Would you like some more songs, or is that enough?
Okay.
You can see that they begin to breathe more easily, and it's just a feeling that
they are relaxed and comfortable. And when they're feeling that way, you feel better. And it's just a reciprocal energy that goes back and forth.
I believe that our purpose as human beings is to be givers. However we can, we go through the hardships of life, we go through the beauty of life, we take all the energy and we find a way to give and help others. So I'm proud of them.
We sing mostly small songs that are written by the choir members. People who don't do it don't get it. They just don't, they're like, why are you doing that? And I think what they're terrified of is actually seeing somebody who's dying.
Namo, Namo.
Most of us think of death as an event, but when I have seen people in their dying, it's a process. I've been able to at least watch the process in others and ask myself, how will I do it? Which I never would have had that conversation ever. I would have just sat in the fear.
Rest easy.
A song can be a bridge from the purely physical, temporal body experience that we have for many years to what lies beyond.
Let every trouble drift away.
Doing this work has made me feel more alive and more into being in the moment. And I hope that at some point in the future, when I am on the threshold, someone will come and sing to me these beautiful, peaceful songs.
We are all just walking each other home.
When they come to sing, is an act of love and support, which is what I need most in my life right now.
We are all just walking each other home.
I'm Tweevu. Thanks so much for watching. A program note, we will be off air next Friday. Join us again on Friday, June 24th. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org.